Meet a woman whose hands carry the memory of oceans, ancestors, and the enduring wisdom of the land. Elizabeth James Perry is not just an artist, she's a keeper of ancestral knowledge and an artist whose work graces institutions from the Peabody Essex Museum to the Smithsonian. And now, as her artistry takes center stage, we are honored to share her voice. This episode of Beyond the Art is made possible by the generous support of the Denver Art Museum, whose commitment to elevating Indigenous artists and stories allow conversations like this to flourish. This is Beyond the Art with Elizabeth James Perry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, you've been recognized with the prestigious NEA Heritage Award, such an incredible honor. What was the moment like when you found out?
Oh, I think I was speechless and I was crying, and I was actually, so secretly, I was really thrilled because I read about it when I was nominated, and I saw that Elizabeth Cotten, the musician, the wonderful guitar player who's, long since passed away, had received one of the earlier awards, and I thought, oh, that would be an amazing thing to get too.
Well, your work is deeply rooted in traditions, yet it is also pushes boundaries to contemporary art. When you first realized how this calling to create things came to you, what was your inspiration and motivation?
That's a huge question.
Sorry, throw the big ones out first.
Yeah, apparently that's great. I'll roll with it. Well, I think that I like a creative challenge, and I am motivated, I guess, most centrally by my interest in the environment, doing things to help the coastal region that I live in the Northeast here. Thinking about what's going to help the environment, what's going to make life here sustainable, what's going to make it possible for the next generations of Wampanoag and other tribal folks, especially to be able to continue some of our art forms. I mean, it will be a choice for them if the material is still here, if the plants and trees are still healthy, if the quahogs are still available. And, if the cuisine is still amazing and delicious and safe to eat. And so I think that's a big part, using art to reach people and educate, to sensitize people to Native history and continuance and interests and issues, I guess is part of what I do.
Well, many artists have that one piece that really shaped their journey. Do you remember the first piece of art you made and how it felt truly bringing that together and seeing the completed piece?
I think it wasn't the first piece that I made, because I've been literally weaving since I was 8. And, I was trying to work with Quahog at almost an equally young age. It's a very hard material. It's more like working with stone. But I think when I was working on a version of a Wampanoag leadership pendant that I have not actually seen in person, because they're very rare. They would be something that you'd see around in, the 16th, 17th, 18th century on Native leaders. But, as society changed and as Puritan values and things took over, wearing a lot of very ostentatious adornment wouldn't really be tolerated or safe, let's just say, for Native people. So I sat down to make, from descriptions mostly, this wampum star pendant on black walnut. So I went through the process. I dyed my material. Wasn't used to working with rawhide at all. So boy, did I mess that up. I think I soaked it and then I tried ironing it. I just didn't know my material.
Right.
I ruined it. So I had to get new rawhide.
Trial and error.
Yes. And then I stitched down hundreds of small purple and white wampum shell beads in an applique circular form, 4-directional symbol, referencing the sun. So it's a sun leadership pendant. And for some reason, the act of visualizing, creating, making, handling it every day for a long time, because it's a time-consuming project, helped me to actually absorb the lessons that go along with the beliefs behind the making of those leadership pendants, and the steadiness and the constancy that they symbolize for leadership, that they're supposed to be with us thick and thin, on good days and bad. And I really started to admire the character, I think, much more deeply of some of our really big historic figures, I think, in Wampanoag society.
Well, talking about motivation and inspiration, you come from a lineage of incredible artists and cultural leaders. How have your mentors influenced your artistic path?
That's another, you like
A big
those
one?
deeper questions. This isn't a what's your favorite earring type interview at all. So I think that, I think of them as coming along with me on my artistic journey. I think that, their stick-to-itiveness, their creativity, their kind of dry humor and sarcasm, and the armor they built up to get through life, but yet pursue their passions and find resources and time to share when there wasn't a lot of support for, I think, openly expressing Native identity and creativity. But, they traveled all over the country and they shared a lot and they were excellent ambassadors. And I try, when I do my work, to carry what they did forward. And I try to let that be really one of my bigger guiding principles, is to represent well, to be respectful, to have some humility and appreciate time to spend with Native people, sharing but also learning.
What are you most surprised about that you've learned during this journey of yours that you didn't know, both personally as an Indigenous person and also artistically as an artist? Sorry, these are big ones. Throw them out, Elizabeth.
This is a flashback to when I was studying marine science, and I had this professor who was really thorough, and she wrote the most thorough exam questions ever. And I jokingly said at the end of one really long exam, it was a graduate level course, and I jokingly said to her, you could have saved yourself the trouble and just written one question: describe planet Earth.
Hey, that's an easy one.
She was great. So let's see. Let me think about your question again for a second, and tell me if I'm wiggling too much. I just tend to do that on camera. Okay. I think that one of the things that perhaps was a delight to me, that I didn't necessarily go in expecting when I went in deep into processing fiber arts from scratch, or growing natural dyes, or learning about, traditional medicines and foods and things like that, working with feathers, working with hide, is that the material itself really teaches you. And you learn in other ways than simply reading a book, especially when there aren't books written about some of the art forms you're trying to learn, sometimes revive. Natural dyes weren't commonly used when I developed an interest. I just had to figure it out. But the plants themselves, they'll teach you. You have to be there. You have to be present. You have to be willing to go outside in the right season and observe the plant and figure out how to coax, using its own properties, how to coax a beautiful color that's permanent, what other things it works well with, what materials it works on, how to put together, how to compose a piece, let the shells kind of speak to you as far as, this would make really lovely earrings, and this will pair beautifully with some red milkweed, or this is really something where it's going to look gorgeous with some yellow milkweed woven into a belt form, or woven into a choker. So I think, I think also it helped that some of my teachers, and I've had many, oftentimes day one was taking the raw material and sitting down and learning to sit still and relate to the material and letting yourself feel what it wanted to become. So allowing that, life in the shell or the clay or the plant fiber to speak to you and inspire what you're going to do.
Yeah, because it must be a learning process. Clay is a natural material, and other forms of Indigenous Native American materials that we use to create our art takes a life path upon itself. Even though you might have an artist, I would think, would have an idea of what they want to create, but when you start manipulating it and creating something, it's like, no, I want to be this. Yeah. So how do you work with that? How does that process work with you?
Yeah, I think, sometimes you start a project, and it could be a really complex piece. So maybe I put the work in and I've made literally hundreds of wampum beads. And I like the old style, really big, really heavy, chunky wampum that weighs 2 tons when you finish weaving it. There's just something so, one thing, it's evocative of the clams themselves. So the quahogs, when they're alive, they're double thick, it's a bivalve, so the two shells together. And then there's a critter inside, of course. It's a living being. That's its house. But the shells by themselves still have a lot of weight and substance and presence. And so when you make the huge beads, they just still have that huge presence to me. And all of those beads have come from different shells. So it's 100, 200, 300 organisms from the ocean, all kind of, I don't know, they're all radiating, their lives and their knowledge. Because the quahog is a slow growing clam, right? So you mentioned clay. Clay is ancient. By the time it's clay and we can use it, it wasn't made yesterday, that's for sure. So the quahogs I work with, the thick ones that I like, they might be 75 years old. They might be older. They're you can count the age rings on the shell, but, as they get older, they get more compressed and it's harder to read. I think the presence of the material is remarkable. And it's just, you can just step back and let them shine. You don't have to be the center. You don't have to be the decider. You can put them together and, they almost sort themselves. And if something's a little, off about the pattern you're originally thinking, perhaps the context is wrong. Perhaps the color balance isn't there. Maybe the shades aren't working the way that you thought, the natural shades. So then you take a break, you have a pace and you respect the materials. And then you figure out, revisiting it, what works and what's going to just be harmonious and convey whatever it is you're trying to communicate.
Well, wampum is such a powerful medium, both visually and culturally. Can you talk about its connection to identity and sovereignty within your work?
Sure. I touched on a little bit of some of the. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. I have a lot of traffic here. Busy street. Let me redo that. So the connection between wampum and sovereignty is really important to remember. For us, wampum has the connotation, when you're wearing a lot of it, it connotes having a lot of responsibility in different aspects of Native life. And leadership can take many forms. Men and women were and are Native leaders in our societies here in the Northeast. And I think the material comes out of the ocean. It's very significant. It is associated with being wholesome, a source of life. That's what the ocean is, essentially. So then to weave a lot of it together to honor your leadership in various forms, whether it's a beautiful wampum belt or a bandolier sash, or, people wore crowns of wampum that were finely woven, the leadership medallions. This is a modest size. They could be huge. That's an incredible amount of work. And I think a statement of it's endorsing, it's appreciating, it's encouraging all of the hard work that leadership puts in to take care of society and keep us going, help us to find our way, help us go in a good direction. Right. So I think that bringing it out is a special occasion. Very few people have the time or perhaps the interest in making huge pieces because the time input is kind of crazy. There's just a huge investment of time. And to learn to do it well takes even more time. So these are pretty rare pieces. But I think they're visual reminders of culture, visual reminders of really core important stories of our creation, of our origin as Native people, of our connection to this region of Mother Earth, our connections to each other and to other tribal nations in the region, even going as far as, Canada or the Mid-Atlantic.
True.
So many stories are associated with or have wampum embedded in them. And there's a reason for that. So I think it's a wonderful reminder that maybe even works on a genetic level. So I think for sharing, intergenerational sharing, bringing people together, acknowledging connections, there are a few things that I would afford the same value to influence and bring people together and connect them as I would to wampum.
Well, you've collaborated on a bead film that explores Native shell carvers alongside industrialized glass bead factories. What did you learn from that experience, and how do you see the role of bead making evolving today?
What did I learn from that experience? Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of a good way to answer that because there's a lot going on. So I use beads that have been used for hundreds of years here, and sometimes I'll deliberately get antique beads, as long as I know the provenance, to incorporate with my wampum, because older style beads tend to be a little bit more handmade, a little bit more individualistic. The quality is amazing. The old chevron beads, for instance, the colors are gorgeous, and I think they can have personality alongside my Quahog beads, which come from living beings. So the properties are maybe a little bit different, but there's presence and weight there, and size, I guess. So watching the construction, watching the production of I'm sorry, I'm not saying this well. I think I'm a maker at heart. It's always going to be interesting to me to watch other people practice their craft. Because, and there are plenty of times when I'm using machinery to work on some of my wampum. It's not that I don't use any modern tools. My hand spinning is probably the least mechanized, except of course I'm using a stove. So, I can't claim that there's no technology or something to what I do. It doesn't matter. I mean, that stuff it's interesting, but not central. Right. When you can look at somebody and see that they've been handling whatever their medium is, whether it's glass, layering glass, drawing that out into the tubes, slicing it, sorting it, and then, seeing the production. If it's more cottage industry, watching older generation folks string up those hanks and then they go to market. There's a flow and this Zen quality to production that I recognize from my own work, that I recognize from when I was younger, watching my mom do scrimshaw. I don't know how she did it when we were kids, but she just had this amazing ability to just focus on what she needed to do. She knew the steps. She had an image of what she wanted to create, and she would sit there until it was done. And it was really sort of the beginning of me being really fascinated by all kinds of artistic processes and really wanting to focus on that in my own career.
Well, your work has been commissioned by major institutions. What's it like seeing your cultural represented in spaces that are historically excluded Native voices?
It's really, it's complicated. It's very, how do I say this? I always have to think.
You don't have to be politically correct.
Sure. So I remember joking. So I come from a culture where humor is fine, obviously. And, some of it will probably seem out of place depending on the context or whatever. But I think, I was always taught humor is how we keep our humanity in the face of adversity. And so dealing with institutions can sometimes trigger that. And I remember joking with some museum administrators, higher ups, that my art was going to help because their building basically looked like the fortress of art. And so my art was going to help make it look more welcoming to people. And I can, you always see like how well something lands or doesn't. And I could see a little consternation when I shared that insight. But I think it was true. Nonetheless, I think it was true. I think for me as a Native person who really, really worked hard and, traveled on my own dime and walked through and took notes on my little notepad in museum collections here in Europe, basically in Canada, anywhere I could find Eastern art, I ate it up. And, I didn't take no for an answer. I reached out and, if it took multiple times of reaching out to basically the keepers of the keys, I would just find ways to meet people and talk to them and build a relationship so that I could see my own cultural heritage, that was under lock and key. In a vault, as my mother would sometimes jokingly say when I talked about my experiences. It was really meaningful for me to look at those pieces. And sometimes it's troubling when you think of others as keeping our culture who don't necessarily care. I mean, the bottom line, it's just different. The museum world is different from the native world. Let's just put it that way.
It's not caring or lack of understanding and representing, the cultural elements in, 580 tribes, and, not just all Native American art is from the Southwest, which I think a lot of people still have that mentality when it's their go-to,
Yes. It's funny. You're saying that. So I live here in Massachusetts, and I'll set up at powwows in this area, including in my home community of Quahog and Martha's Vineyard. And I meet folks who are visiting the powwow who are from there, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I saw you in Santa Fe. That's where I always go to do my shopping." And it's just like, so when you're a native artist and you work hard and it's windy in Aquina, and it's sometimes it's a cold powwow, and there's a hurricane coming invariably, and you get so thirsty because you're stuck at the table. And there's just an irony of, well, I don't really shop heavily for native art here, but I travel way the heck. Yeah, sorry. You probably don't want to use that. Just sharing.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's that moment of, am I chopped liver? I mean, I'm just...
Yeah. Or the various native artists that we've had on the show, and the non-native going to some of these markets and saying, well, your art's not really Indian or native. It's like, excuse me? That understanding that we still culturally have to educate the collectors and the buyers that, yes, it is. Our story is ever evolving. We are native people, so we're creating native art. Maybe it's not what you're used to, but it is still Native American indigenous art.
Sure. Yeah, I think the other thing is, in some of our regions, our art forms were made illegal, or they were appropriated. Wampum was appropriated to become this money. So who knows? I mean, who could even tally what the loss is just from that?
Is there a piece of wampum art or beadwork you've created that holds an especially deep meaning for you?
I think I've had a few projects like that. If I can talk about more than one. One of them is really recent, and it's kind of a combination of traditional wampum weaving. So I make larger beads. I rounded them on this particular occasion. I was doing an artist residency at the Isle of Shoals, Appledore Island, at Shoals Marine Lab. I'm not saying this well. Maybe I should restate that. So it was at Shoals Marine Lab at an artist residency, and I made some beads over several long afternoons, and I spun some milkweed, dyed it red. And I had been monitoring the marine mammal class because as an artist in residence, you can also attend the classes there. It's been a long time since I've, actively been in a university setting studying marine mammals, but I love them and they inspire so much of what I do. And generations of my family obviously have interacted with whales. That's our identity. It's on our tribal seal. You can't get away from whales when you're Wampanoag. And so in listening to the class, there was a, focus on sperm whale society, behavior, adaptations, and then also echolocation for hunting. And there was a scientific graph. We were looking at different graphs of whale calls and them using echolocation to find prey, understand their environment, where the bottom was, orientation, all of that. Probably find and communicate with each other as well. And so I took the graphical image of the whale call from the sperm whale and I wove it into this modest sized wampum piece while I was there, while I was contemplating the beautiful Atlantic Ocean and thinking about these beings. And we got to do a couple of whale watches where we were observing some humpback whales feeding and some minkies and as well. And so that, I think, I understand wampum to know it well enough that wampum was often being used to record actual events, words, used as a memory device for giving speeches of what treaty agreements were made where and between whom. and having to do with what, situation. I just liked using the wampum to record communication between other than human beings, with each other, with other beings in the ocean, using this ocean material. There was just something really special about that moment. So it's not the biggest piece I've ever made, for sure, but it's just, to me, really interesting to think about and remember.
Well, let's go a little bit deeper into that. Not a big question. You hold a degree in marine science, which I think is really cool. How does your scientific background inform your art and cultural work?
It's big. So I think of the full lifespan of all the things that I use. I don't really think that is necessarily or was necessarily unusual for Native artists, Native makers. But I think that it's only recently that I feel like through TEK, through traditional ecological knowledge and those discussions, it's being acknowledged. How much science, how much knowledge, really sophisticated knowledge. When I am handling materials and thinking about all the dye artists who had a very sophisticated understanding of how chemistry works and how to take a red berry and coax a beautiful permanent blue dye out of it. It looks like a magic trick, but it's a matter of understanding acidity, and how to process materials and how to permanently bond them, and understanding all of the little properties of every single aspect of the material you're using to make things that have integrity. So I can walk into a museum now and I'm picking up knick-knack baskets that are quilled that still have beautiful color because someone cared a lot about what they were doing and about sharing that knowledge, because it's not just one. There's many baskets. There's not just one wampum belt. There's many. It takes thousands of years to put together that knowledge. So as a scientist with formal training, I know I had to do the work. I had to, it's not glamorous. Organic chemistry. Hello. That's a lot of discipline, and it's a lot of sacrificing and staying focused. And then it's a lot of really good teachers handing down that knowledge too, and sharing knowledge, not hoarding it, sharing it. There's just so much to it. So I have an enormous amount of respect for ancestors who did that same work. And I don't think for me, I wasn't raised to think that there was a separation between art and math and science. There's a lot of those things in each other.
The connectivity to it all.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you're part of the C.W. Morgan 38th Voyager program as a Wampanoag whaling descendant. That sounds like such an incredible adventure. Can you share a memorable moment from that experience?
Sure. Have you ever seen the Charles W. Morgan?
No, I haven't. Okay. It's on my list.
Yeah, you might really appreciate it. So for me, I went into the experience of being able to be on board the Charles W. Morgan and travel on it, not quite knowing what to expect. Thinking about the hard days of industrial whaling, and how many of the men in our community, sometimes children, sometimes people went to work on those ships quite young, some of them unwillingly, there was indentured servitude and things. And then, of course, the processing and handling of the whale in industrial situations is quite different from the way that community handles and respects and has protocol, So the level of agency on those ships is a bit different than traditional society. And I just think, it's possible that there's just like a lot of trauma there, even to this day, in different ships and sites and docks and all. And I was expecting perhaps that might be a big part of my experience. Somehow I got on the ship and I felt very much at home, and I think sometimes that is, the coastal island boating, whaling descendant that I am, it's in my genes. I'm on a boat on the ocean. That's a perfect day. Maybe I should say this carefully. Maybe it's a perfect day almost in any circumstance. That's where you want to be. For me, there's a reason why I went into marine biology, because I can hold on to that and experience that,
Right.
So I got on the ship and suddenly it felt like home. And I just started thinking about it was to actual family members. So William Wallace James, my great grandfather's brother, was, I believe, the first mate on that ship. For example, there were other gay headers who shipped out on that, and other Native people in general who, from other tribes who shipped out on it as well. And so I just began to really get a sense of all the time people had spent working and maintaining the ship, replacing damaged planks, keeping the boats in working order, fixing the lines, setting up all the knots the way they were supposed to be, just keeping its integrity. I think so much care went into this ship that years later, when it was falling apart, and Colonel Green was trying to get somebody to take it, it was in New Bedford, trying to get people to rally around preserving this ship. There was something special about the ship even then. And I think, luckily people saw it and it came together, the materials to fix it up properly. The story behind that is really amazing. And I was able to spend time with Matthew Stackpole and learn about that quite a bit. It was really an honor to be there and to begin to understand there's something about what you invest in something is what you get back, even generations later.
Mm-hmm. Well, from ocean to land, let's talk about the sea turtle mound garden with the native students at Amherst College. What inspired that project, and what do you hope students take away from it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, students helped me make it. It was great. We were hand shoveling and we formed the body. And, I think me as a coastal person, island person, a kind of Wampanoag, coastal beings, awareness of the ocean, rallying to protect the ocean. That's been a big part of what I've done, whether I was in marine science formally or if I was working for my tribe's historic preservation office or working independently as an artist and an educator as well. And so that's part of what I bring with me, and that's part of what I have to share wherever I go. So, I've done the horseshoe crab garden. I created a blue shark garden in Franklin Park. In that particular instance, I was very interested in creating a turtle. There's something about the setting, and I wanted, of course, to make a sea turtle because I've seen lately, meaning the past few years, I've been able to see some really large leatherbacks, just even from land on the Cape. I was just lucky enough, to see that. It's very inspiring, and the scale is amazing. To see a sea turtle with a head the size of a seal's is just, I don't have photos because I know I'd mess up taking the pictures, so I just don't even try to take pictures. I just stare. So they're very inspirational and mysterious and long-lived. And so here's this design that I come up with. And it was just, there's something about doing that together, shoveling the soil, creating the shape, going through all the steps of, we put the fish in. I had some herring. We put the fish in as fertilizer. We then came back and planted the seeds, and the students get to just enjoy the look of the garden or harvest, or the birds are just enjoying basically harvesting. And then sometimes, of course, the deer get the memo and they graze, and sometimes you have to replant at that point.
Yeah. It sounds so amazing and just incredible opportunity for those students, and being involved in it, I'm sure was resonated deeply within them.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, Indigenous art is getting more recognition globally. What shifts are you seeing how Native artists and traditions are being represented?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot more visibility for Native people in general, in a lot of different venues, or there has been. I would love to say that will continue. Certainly, people are working really hard to ensure that it does. I'm trying to be cheerful here. I think I think I am really glad that there's a lot more visibility for Native arts and Native artists. I really hope that the values that ensured that our tribes are still intact today, the ones that are the people who've been able to keep connections with community, to learn art forms and practice them. Um, I really hope that that can continue because I think the art itself contains and holds so many stories and lessons and knowledge. And I believe that exposure to Native art will always be positive. That especially I think Native descendants um, who are able to see and experience and touch will understand things about their heritage and identity that, just writing a story or a book, those are good things too. Don't get me wrong. Communication is really important, but I think that there's things sometimes embedded in something artistic that can convey so much more. So I think that it's really important to create opportunities for making art, experiencing that. But I don't think everybody can or will be artists or want to just dedicate themselves to it.
Right.
But that said, I think that people will still benefit from having it around them in some way. In making it accessible, I think that's really big. I wouldn't have had to do. I wouldn't have been flying to Paris to look for my. Who the heck? I mean, what would my ancestors say? Like, what's wrong with this kid? You know.
What inspires you? What motivates you in your creating your pieces and your craft?
I look at pieces and I think sometimes when I'm looking at art, an old sash, I don't really see it the way it is because I'll revisit it again sometimes and I'll be like, wow, that's old and it looks really worn out. Oh my gosh. But sometimes, weirdly, the first time I see it, it'll look kind of new and quite beautifully composed, and I won't register the holes. I won't register the moth damage or whatever. I'll just be like really excited to see it. And it feels like it's like meeting an old friend. It's the best way I can think of. It's just like, there you are, mutual recognition. You just feel it. That to me, that's so inspiring. Just feeling, I think, some of the love that past generations had for materials and time and their thoughts towards whoever was going to be the recipient of the piece, because it's a bit different. Making things just for commerce, right. I think, where there's anonymity and perhaps not much of a connection between the person producing and the person who's consuming. It's different. Sometimes there's a lot less of a social connection in some ways. So some of those pieces, I think, embody that sort of pre-industrial, pre-extremely busy, pre-looking at my phone every 2 minutes between our discussion, during our discussion. It's different and it's more striking. It's very, it nourishes the soul in a way that's difficult for me to describe. And I guess if I aspire to anything, I aspire to make pieces that have that same effect. So hundreds of years later, random Wampanoag, and I'll pick up a basket and go, whoa, this is very amazing and intense. And I've got to learn how they made this or how she made this. Or who knows? Nobody would probably know my name back, that far in the future, but it doesn't matter. I don't need to know names. I just recognize.
Right. Is it more about the longevity and the sustainability of the piece that you've created, that its legacy has carried on?
It's there is that, but I also, unpacking that a little bit, I do kind of feel like sometimes it's the pure love of an artist, the pure love that an artist has for their materials, for their process, for their inspiration.